Hi, everybody. My name is Toni Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know I have another best-selling author with me today, Christopher Reich. Welcome, Christopher.
Tony, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm excited to talk to you. I read your novel, um, and this is always for me my litmus test. I've said this before on the podcast. What is my litmus test for a great novel? I can't put it down.
Mhm.
I want to read it in one sitting. So that was true of yours. If I hadn't just conked out because I was exhausted being up too many hours, I probably would have read your novel in one sitting. It's a thrill ride from beginning to end. Um, it it Matterhorn. It's set in Switzerland, and one of the things I loved about it is a lot of the heroes that you read about in your average thriller of this kind, they're young,
Mhm.
right? So your person, your main guy, Mac, he's 60 or almost 60, I think, but I think he's 60. Um, and I loved that. Like he comes out of retirement, and I don't think there's enough characters out there that put an
Mhm.
emphasis on the wisdom and the savvy, right? That comes with a little bit of age, with somebody who's been in that rodeo before and they get it. And some of that gets built up with time, doesn't it? Like with any career.
You hit the nail on the head, and that was really one of the main driving forces when I write this book, the new Mac Decker series. First, let me say that, when I set out to write these books, they are thrill rides. I write international, globe-trotting, loyalty blurring, bomb ticking thrillers. That's when I set out, that's kind of my mission statement, right? And of course, I am Swiss. I grew up a lot in Switzerland. So when we're, traversing the country and reading through the pages of Matterhorn, that's really a world that I know like the back of my hand. So when you're reading the book, I hope you feel like you could feel the wind blowing and actually look up and see the Matterhorn up there. Um,
I could
yeah.
honestly, I'd never been to Switzerland, but I did get that. I didn't even have to ask you whether or not you had been there because you captured it. I knew you had.
Well, thank you. And the idea with Mac being, pushing 60, uh, is that our world has changed so dramatically in the last 30 or 40 years. Let's say contrast it to when, the people that I read growing up. I like to say, I learned to write reading the classics. Frederick Forsyth, Tom Clancy, Robert Ludlum, right? Those are my teachers, sorry, right? That's my pantheon of greats. But remember, those heroes back then were all, like you said, Tony, 30 years old, 28 years old. If the guy was 40, he was really pushing his, one leg in the grave practically. But just look around us. Our world has changed so dramatically. The way we take care of ourselves, the things we eat, the things we try to do. So I thought in myself, I am 62 and I am really reaching kind of the peak of my fitness because my kids are out of the house. I'm in the gym every day. I'm always trying to schedule some type of difficult endeavor to aim for. And, by golly, all this stuff works. You know, I could do more pull-ups now than I could when I'm 30. And so I thought, Matt Decker, that's me on steroids. That's someone, the story opens up. He's had to hide away in the Swiss Alps in this tiny mountain town of Zinal. I mean, population 10 men and a goat to hide to save himself and to save his family. But during that time, he's been out walking, hiking. He takes care of the cows in the summer, but he's an outdoors guy and he keeps fit. So he may be pushing 50, but this guy, his skill set, as Liam Neeson said, in Taken, I have a very special set of skills. His skill set is as sharp as ever. And so, right from the beginning of Matterhorn, he is pulled out of retirement, but he's going to open up that bag of skills. And, as we advance through the book, we're going to see him put them all to very good use.
True, right? And he comes out of retirement slash hiding, I'll say, um, for a particular reason. Like in that case, his son is killed. So, I guess you could say following in his footsteps, in the same field. And this pulls him back. into it, like a bucket of water, right? In the face, it pulls him right back into a world that I think he probably missed, but was happy it appeared not being part of anymore. But
I think some of these operatives that are I've done a lot of research. I've spent a lot of time, at the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency, and I've worked in my previous books with special operators, people in the Marine Special Operations Command, Navy SEALs, and they function on adrenaline. It takes such a rare individual to be able to process and handle the kind of stressful situations they're in. But once they negotiate, once they navigate these successfully, pathways in their brains are changed. Their uptake, their serotonin uptake, their need for oxytocin, stuff like that that makes you and I happy is forever altered. And so they can't just go through the day like say, oh, I'm going to go to Starbucks and read my book. They're always thinking of maybe what's the next step? What can I do to challenge myself? They're looking for, I don't want to say life-threatening situations, but hey, if it comes, they're ready.
yeah, it's like I read a book once. I think it was called Crazy Busy, although I don't remember who wrote it. And it's all about how the brain starts to change or adapt when you get too busy, right? It starts like in the beginning, and he tells us a little anecdote that in the beginning he went up and he became a short order cook, and he was overwhelmed, like he couldn't do more than one thing. He everything was a disaster, a complete hot mess. And by like 2, 3 months, like the end of the summer in that job, he could have 12 things on the grill at the same time. He was watching everything and paying attention to what was happening in the restaurant. Like your brain has a great way of starting to splinter to be able to pay attention to a number of things if you train it. And I think that's sort of the skill set you can see that somebody like this would have, right? This just ability to bifurcate their attention, to be sharp in a number of ways simultaneously, right? Because
Mhm.
I think you need that, right? For this. I mean, you need to be paying attention to not only what's ahead of you, but 10 other things that are going on at the same time, not to wind up killed in that profession.
Well, when you're trained to operate in a foreign and a hostile environment, you really do have to have like eyes in the back of your head and a really
Right.
like a sense, a real feeling of, what's going on around you. Mac, prior to going into hiding, was part of a team of the CIA operatives, part of the Special Activities Division, which really exists, that was dropped into Israel and then into Syria to eliminate high value targets from a safe distance. But this is what we've been doing. I don't know if our listeners know, but even to this day, we have a couple thousand soldiers in Syria. Okay. We're pretty much at war with Syria, but we've carved out a little niche in little areas. We have our own people there. They were there early to take care of ISIS, which they did very admirably, but they're still there. If some danger pops up, they're ready to hop in a chopper, go in, identify that target, and eliminate that. So you think about that kind of mindset where you have to be ready at a moment's notice or with a little preparation to leave a comfortable office environment where you're studying. You know, they map these operations out, intricately. But you're going to go from, having a nice warm meal in a nice restaurant or in the commissary, hopping on a chopper, going into for sure enemy territory, hiding out for a day or two with snipers. They have to move into position, hidden, taking the shot, getting out without being killed. So that's an amazing difference from eating a nice breakfast at Denny's to all of a sudden, being in the middle of a war zone where your life really hangs by a thread. And so I think that does a number on people's minds. But a lot of people can't handle it. That's what you get a lot of the PTSD, and I know I couldn't. But Mac is someone that can handle it exquisitely. And now when he's called upon to come back in the game, he's ready to bring his A game.
Sure. I mean, and one of the things I like in your book to being on, going on a sleigh ride, right? I mean, getting on that sled when you were a kid and you stop at the top of the mountain, and then that's it. Once it takes off, there's just no stopping it until you hit the bottom. That's kind of like the ride you're on. You jump right on from the beginning, right? There's this somewhat cinematic opening, with helicopters and gunfire, and I mean, you're just right in. Right. There isn't really a build up. Sometimes with books, there's a build up, there's a dull period while you're starting to get to know people or get the vibe. There really isn't that. You're like right in the middle of like, a love story,
I
guns a blazing,
I like to
helicopters.
set, and I think it's a good rule for thriller writers, and not for all writers, but for thriller writers. Okay, when people pick up one of my books or some of my contemporaries, you kind of want to start the story at the end of the third act of another story. Okay. So the book opens up on the face of the Matterhorn. It's in a small hut. You don't even know where they are. It's in a small hut. An agent's meeting with another woman agent, an American with a Russian. They're exchanging clearly, top secret information. They hear some
And they're in
noises.
love.
They're in love. They should be husband and wife. They're in love. They share a child together. Um, uh, they hear some noises. You open the door and you pull back the camera, and the little room they're in is on a ledge at 12,000 feet on the spine of the Matterhorn, the most iconic mountain in the world, known to anybody. You show a picture of the Matterhorn, people know what that is, and and boom, the story starts. They're on the run from the beginning, and that's the kind of book I love to read. It's like, oh my God, right away you're drawn in. You like these people, you understand their predicament, you feel the conflict, and you see that there's a conflict that's going to be need to be resolved as you move through. It's like, let's get going.
Yeah. Right. Because you get that sense like there's this when all the action happens, and I'm not going to ruin the book for anybody as to say how that chapter ends, but you kind of open up anew, right after the big scene, and then you meet, you're right there with Mac, and you're seeing how he gets drawn back in. Um, and I think it was so. I guess you say thrilling because I think a lot of books wind up getting the title thriller that don't feel at all like this, right? This was your old school thriller. This was, you go through there's an exciting, there's one thing after another. Tell me something about when you were creating Mac, about this character because it comes through that you love this character. Can you tell me some quality that maybe you were going to give him and rolled back?
Well,
Some
I grew
trait?
up, one of my greatest reading heroes is John le Carré, the English spy novelist. And I say that because when I'm writing these books and I turn them in, my agent always says, Chris, write like John le Carré. Don't write like someone that's much more over the top. It's not a Michael Bay thriller, try to ground these people in reality. So I tried to give him as many real life traits as possible. Now, Mac grew up as a kid, he was a mountain climber. He was a thrill seeker, but even then, he was an alpinist. He climbed El Capitan, he climbed Half Dome, he climbed some of the greatest mountains in the world. So he's used to kind of living on the edge. Okay. At the same time, he was an uneducated person growing up, and he had this appetite to better himself, to read, then later to become credentialed to earn his degree. So he's been an achiever. Okay. And I know I love reading. The reason, I never took a writing class before I wrote my first book. I had just read so many novels. It had just been put into my DNA. This is how you write a book, right? And so Mac's a little bit the same way. And especially after this 8 years in exile, he has been consuming any kind of literature, seeing all these movies, trying to teach himself languages. So he's someone with, let's say, an indefatigable appetite for education. So I love that about him. At the same time, he's deeply conflicted because he's had to leave his family in order really to save them and to save
Mhm.
himself. And when I say leave them, I mean radio silence. He's had to go into this town, and it's really a testament to his and anyone's self-discipline to be able to say, I can no longer reach out to those I love. So here's a man that's really has faced a lot of adversity, and was planning on being that way the rest of his life. And he's drawn out of that when his son, who of course he's so torn that he never knew enough, knew well enough, or was able to love, passes away in what he knows right away is in heroic fashion. So, he doesn't see himself as a hero. He sees himself as a father saying, I need to know what happened to my son. I have two daughters. I would have acted exactly the same way.
What does the writing process look like for you?
Uh,
I mean, are you someone who creates off of an outline? Do you need everything planned ahead of time? Are you somebody who has to sit behind the computer and it just your fingers just start going on the keyboard? These characters exist in your head and they tell you what happens next?
it's a combination. First of all, I like to say that when you have this job, which is to write basically a thriller every year, to write a well plotted, structured book of about 100,000 words, it's a job. Okay, this is a job. And this romantic notion of thrillers and the muse landing on your shoulder and, oh, isn't this great? It's not the way it goes. Prior to becoming an author, I worked in investment banking. I worked at the Union Bank of Switzerland in Zurich. Then I ran a watch company for about 7 years, also in Switzerland. So I applied the same work ethic when I was a business person as I did when I launched this new business of being Christopher Reich, author. So, Toni, I get up every morning. I try to be at my desk by 7:30, 8 o'clock. I usually exercise before. I come with a clear mind, clear set of eyes. I put my phone as far away as possible. I turn off wireless. I don't want to have any access. And I go to work. Now, I write longhand on a yellow legal pad. I've never been able to just find the magic using my keys. But to answer your question, it's a job. So I write from 8 until noon. I'll rest. Sometimes I'll take a nap for 20 minutes. At 1:30, I'm back until as long as I can go, but never before 4 or 4:30. And the writing process changes. The hardest part of writing these books is the beginning and figuring out what story are you going to tell? How do you tell it? What's it all about? I do not outline extensively. I know what the beginning is about. I kind of know who my characters are. Certainly, I know my main couple of characters, and I usually have in mind what the ending is because these endings have to be explosive, exciting, dynamic. Um, the ending is where you're kind of suspending your disbelief. Okay. So my job is to tell a story that seems factual enough in the first 200 pages. So in the last 100, when things get kind of crazy, that you're going to follow me there and say, yeah, well, our character was capable enough to do this earlier. I believe he's, going to climb the Empire State Building without any ropes, no problem, right? Um, but
Because you
this is
wanted to believe. I mean,
you want to
you,
believe. Yeah.
definitely, I think with Mac, you created somebody who you trusted, right? You trusted. You thought like, wow, if I was in this position, this is the guy I'd want coming to rescue me. That's the like I said, there was an old school savvy to Mac that I just don't think exists with youth. I think it actually requires um someone in a situation. There's lots of things and lots of careers I believe that that's true for. That while we tend to say, "Oh, well, this person's older," and we'll put that aside, you don't realize the what comes with the wisdom that truly does come with age and somebody who's done a job for a long time is not created by any other method.
Well, all I can say is I wish I were as patient and empathetic and listening uh, 30 years ago as I am today, because I would have been a lot better off at everything I did. But we're not that way. Most people aren't, hardwired that way when you're 25 or 30. It's all about go, go, go. I know best. Fire off the cuff, It works sometimes. It doesn't work all the time. And so I love that Mac has that ability to take a deep breath and say, hold it, what's the best course of action before I commit? And like you say, that only comes with age and wisdom.
You got a little bit of love in there.
Oh,
uh,
I always want to put a love interest in my story. And one of the things the Mac gave up was his one true love. He'd been married, he was divorced. and through his work, he fell in love with a very competent, savvy, attractive Israeli operative, Ava Atal, working with the Mossad, who was helping him plan these operations, and they kind of found their life partner. You know, they are bonded. They are just so perfect together. And sadly, he had to abandon her, you know, for very interesting reasons that one comes to learn, you know, as you read Matterhorn. Um, and the first person he goes to as he's questing to find his son's killer, the one person he knows who he can rely on to give him the information he needs, the technology, is Ava, who happens now also to have semi left the covert dark world and is living in Zurich, is the Israeli consul general to Switzerland. So they are able to rekindle their romance in the heat, in the crucible of their quest to find these killers and to stop a very kind of nefarious, evil deed, a terrorist act from taking place.
Sure. What I liked about the romance as well is it's not your James Bond romance, right? It's not your I'm a fancy spy kind of guy and everything's meaningless. I mean, you're there. You feel the emotion, you feel the story. And I love that. Right? I love those kind of stories where you kind of get into the layers because I believe that most relationships are nuanced, right? There isn't always a black and a white. There's
Well,
there's
indeed, the very nuanced, and of course, he comes back to elicit her help. She's very bitter, saying when she learns, it's like, didn't you love me enough to trust me? You know, you could have reached out to me. And so there is definitely a lot of layers here. She wants to love him, but can she trust him? Is he using her? Can she allow her heart to love again after being so heartbroken?
will he
So,
disappear again once he gets what he
yeah,
wants?
he's going to disappear again. And I'll pull back the curtain a little bit on the writing process. I wrote this book first as a screenplay. And you can see it's very cinematic, and this should be a movie. And I mean, the book opens up on the Matterhorn, it ends on the Matterhorn. The Matterhorn is it's considered the easiest mountain for a seasoned alpinist to climb and the hardest mountain for a young climber to go up. It is not totally vertical. It's very, very steep and it's very exposed, which means everywhere you look, it's thousands of feet you could drop. But these days, Toni, the best climbers can basically run up and down the Matterhorn in about an hour and 20 minutes. It would take me 8.5 hours to go up. But these people run up this in a feat of daredevilry without any ropes and touch the top and come back. It makes my palms wet now. And I was inspired by the great movie Free Solo, starring Alex Honnold, who climbed El Capitan without ropes, and by the equally exceptional cinematography of Jimmy Chin, who is a personal hero, who is also an extreme outdoor athlete, an incredible mountain climber, and he's a cinematographer. When you see Free Solo, they brought these giant cameras right down onto 3,000 feet above Yosemite Valley to film this climber. And I thought, my God, we have to bring that kind of excitement to the commercial cinema, to your Cineplex down the street, you know. So that was my first idea. I do some climbing myself, and I said, my God, I want to see a camera following these crazy guys running up this. One step, one mistake, and you'll plummet 4,000 feet to your death.
Nerves of steel. Nerves of steel to be able to do it. And I guess the key thing for something like that is that you can't be thinking about that, right? Anybody I've ever spoken to who does something dangerous for a living, they never think about, gee, one step to the right and I'd fall to my death. Like they only think about what they're there doing, and there's no thought whatsoever to the potential consequence of being off their game.
No thought, especially when you're climbing, you really climb with a window of about 3 feet above you, 3 feet to each side, and you're just drilled in, you're focused there, where you're going to put your hands, where will you put your feet, and you're moving. I mean, you're talking about at the Matterhorn, you're going up at 12, 15,000 feet. The sun is at 14,007. So there's oxygen deficiency. It's usually extremely windy. And I can't tell you how scary it is to be up there when the wind starts blowing. And so you have a level of concentration which is near superhuman. And you have to, because Tony, you can't be sitting, like you said, you can't go, oh, what if I slip? That does not enter your head. You're just moving. And I tried to translate that, especially at the end of the book, about what it's like for these two guys to be chasing each other up this incredible mountain, which is scenic, dangerous, and just cinematic and pure fun.
Oh, it absolutely was. How did I have to wonder, how did technology affect you? Like in writing the book, like the changes in technology, right? So because years ago, if you go back to like an probably when you first started writing books or even earlier, I think maybe before we started recording, we're talking about the original like Tom Clancy kind of uh, uh, books when this kind of genre really was taking its form. Um, there wasn't the technology there is now in the world that keeps us as connected as it is, that can do the things that it can do. How does that change the way you write?
Well, one of the themes in a lot of my books is how technology enables the normal human being to become almost superhuman. And we just take it for granted with our iPhones, the access to the entire history, knowledge of the history of the world is at our fingertips. Um, these days, with surveillance, with eavesdropping, we have the ability, just ourselves, to really act as our own personal national intelligence agency. Okay. I mean, I can leave this and I can get satellite imagery down to 6 inches of any city in the world, practically reading license plates of cars. Just me, I'll pay you $20 and I can get that. I could contact experts all over. So that is the way that certainly technology has rendered these books actually a lot harder to write because there's no excuses. You can't be looking for a payphone or, waiting just to collect a piece of paper from an agent. All that information is at everyone's fingertips. So it makes you be a lot more nimble when you're writing these books. You really have to keep up to date with these things because readers are smart. They know that too. And they're always on the lookout for you to make some type of gaffe. Uh, uh, in terms of writing wise, I mean, just the fact that I could write an email to my editor and get a response in 24 hours is so phenomenal. Remember, back when I started in 1995, my first book, Numbered Account, was published in 98, but I would write my book and you couldn't send email. So I would have to print out the copies, go to my printer and print out 600 pages and FedEx it to my agent in New York. He would read it and the back and forth would take weeks and not to mention very expensive. So
Sure,
just the
maybe even with the
facility.
paper that had the thing around the edge, remember?
Yeah, exactly. You have to pull those little the dot matrix printer
Yeah.
to pull that stuff off. So it is so much easier to get stuff, done quickly. But that's why all of us hate, like, look at your email box, like always so full. People want answers, yesterday, and they expect you just to drop everything, answer my email. It's really important. But in
Well, there was
all,
a
it's
time
so
when
much
you
easier.
could, years ago, you could go off the grid, right? There weren't cell phones. So once you left any location, even before paging, being able to page you, nobody was going to get a message to you until you returned, or you came back to where there was a phone that could be called, or maybe they had to leave a message and wait. I find the difference now is we're never off the grid, which
I
I
hate
thought
being on the grid. Yeah.
was really interesting about the change, for your main character, because he truly is sort of off the grid, right? When he winds up in this little town.
He has to be. He knows that they're looking for him. So any uh, phone call, any connection or attempt to reach his relatives, he knows people are looking. There's, like I say, a line. There's tripwires everywhere now, with the cameras, the surveillance cameras, with the internet looking for certain words that might pop up. He has to literally, like I say, maintain radio silence, which means contact nobody, speak to nobody, certainly contact nobody through a digital system, the internet, telephone, all that stuff off limits.
Was there ever a different ending?
No, well, there was a couple different endings, but I knew how at the very end what had to happen. Say there's a lot of emotion in this book, and Mac's life is considerably different at the end as it is at the beginning. And I know that I shed a tear when I was writing it about this guy's new beginning. He's still back up in the mountains, but things have differed. He did find his love interest. There's kids involved. Everything's changed for him, right? Which is fun because now I've written a second book and we're really opening up his universe now to learn about him, his family, what happened before. And of course, in the next book called right now The Tourist, which is set in Paris, he's drawn right back in, against his will, kind of into this secret world, which is even more dangerous than it was in Matterhorn.
Well, that's it. One of the things I really wanted to ask you. Is there life after this for him? Because I definitely would want to hang out with him again. Like I wanted to know more. The fact that the story was ending there, I said, "Oh, I could have gone on." You know what I mean? I could have definitely continued. So I'm happy to
Well,
hear that there's a
it is.
sequel.
It becomes a kind of a family saga, which is interesting about Mac, about his daughter Jane, about Ava. The second story opens up a year later. He's been free. The CIA says, "You're good. You're clear, buddy. We're not after you anymore. Live your life exactly the way you want to. But just one thing, don't contact anybody. You're out of the game. You're not allowed to speak to anybody about what you did or get back involved. If you do that, who knows? Let sleeping dogs lie." And the book opens in Paris. He's celebrating with his wife. He's actually about to get married. He's about to propose marriage to Ava in a beautiful restaurant in the Eiffel Tower. And she goes, he has the ring in his pocket. He can feel it. And she goes, "Mac, I got a phone call. Let me get this call." And she walks away to take a call and she never comes back. And then that's the beginning. He has to start searching for her. And what do you have to do? The first thing he has to do is break the promise he gave to start contacting the people that he knows, that huge network of operatives that exist in Europe, of people he'd worked with for the last 30 years. And he knows, uh-oh, the second I contact them, it's like kicking the hornet's nest.
I already am sitting on the edge of my bed now, waiting for the next one now. You gave me just enough of a taste to really be miserable that I have to wait. Yeah, wow. Okay. Yeah, so it's good to know that there's life after this for them, and that's some story. I was gonna say, I like as a rule, right? I'm a big well, I like historical fiction, but I mean I'm a big fan of literary fiction, right? As a rule, I say give me one of those messy multi-generational stories where somebody learns something in the end, and that's usually right where I lie at my favorite. But I like almost everything. I read almost everything but science fiction. Science fiction is the only thing I don't read. I don't really like. And I was never able to kind of acclimate myself to it, even though I've tried multiple times. Um, and what I liked about your book is even though I was expecting it to be a thriller, and it was a thriller, it was just like I said, it was like getting on the sled at the top of the hill and just, you couldn't stop, you couldn't look either way, you just had to keep looking straight ahead and hold on and be on your best game. You have to pay attention, when you're reading this book, you really have to pay attention from beginning to end. Um, but I loved that there was a lot of this other stuff going on. Like it felt, like I said, there was this nuanced love story going on. There's other characters. There's a little bit betrayal. I don't want to give away too much, but there's these other relationships, these other things, and that brought more than just a thrill. It's not your typical, hey, I'm a fancy, I'm not knocking James Bond movies or anything like that. I know there are people who love them. But it's not that feel. It's not just this, one exciting character who like zips through and never feels anything, never, is just cool 24/7, gets through his mystery, does a lot of cool stuff, right? So
Well,
a
I
lot
think
of pretty girls, a lot
readers
of fancy cars.
readers love to connect with characters. And I don't really read that many thrillers myself. I also read to become a better writer and a better student of human nature, kind of literary fiction. I mean, my favorite book, a couple of favorite books of the last 5 years were All the Light You Cannot See by Anthony Dare, which I consider
Yeah.
truly one of the great masterpieces I've ever read in my life.
Yeah.
I closed that book and I was crying. It was
It was
so
hard to read.
emotional. It was so great. And then I loved A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles.
A
Uh,
good one.
Oh, I love that book because I grew up in Europe and I'd been in a lot of hotels. So for me, it's like I knew that world, even though it was in 1917. I just loved that book. And he's just an amazing writer and a student of the human condition. See, that's what you have to put in, and that's where really good writing takes place. Is it's not just a thriller. It has to be about people. I can tell you that a lot of pages of this book got cut that were really more emotional, more about Mac feeling about his sons dying, about all these things. But the 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 point of this book is to turn pages, and you have to be, Hemingway always says he knew how good a book was by how many of his favorite lines and scenes he left out, right? And
Mm.
so I kind of follow that dictum where I hope I can insinuate a lot of things I'm feeling, but my books are not about 5 pages, going into lamentations or personal discovery. They're just not, okay? I want to intimate that. I want you to feel that, but you have to go somewhere else to get that kind of enjoyment, which I love reading, in tons of other books. You like history fiction? My favorite book recently is Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall series, all three of those books about Henry VIII. I read all of them twice, and that's a big accomplishment.
Gotta love Henry VIII.
Yeah, gotta love Henry VIII. So, I love those books, and I love nonfiction. The Wager by David Grann just came out about the shipwreck, and you learn about these people, how they thought, and I try to put that in my books.
I always say, like with the Henry VIII story, I'm most fascinated with the human condition, right? How the human mind works. Because Anne Boleyn, right? She's there and she marries him with the mindset, I suppose, of he'd never do this to me, right? You stand by and you watch him treat his first wife really badly. I mean, really badly. Cuts her off, takes the child away from her. I mean, really just doesn't stop until he's completely ruined her. And you marry him with that mindset, like, oh, yeah, I see him killing off his enemies and I see him treating this woman so poorly, but I guess I'm somehow in a bubble that's going to protect me forever. And I think that's something that's true in the human mind throughout history. It's universally true, right? People will look at somebody who have shown them who they are, and will go, oh, but not me, right?
Mhm.
That's what I love about reading stories, because no one really captures that enough, but I love that part of the story. It's a tale, you know, that's been around forever. Yeah, he'll do it to you. Like the day will come, right? He's having you beheaded. Like the day comes when he was even worse to you than he was to her.
Well,
And
it was a different era back then. Um, so Anne Boleyn was stupid. I would posit that the fourth wife, Catherine Howard, was even stupider because Anne Boleyn had actually already been beheaded. Catherine of Aragon was just kind of sequestered in a castle and not allowed to see her kid. In general, kings treated queens pretty poorly back then, I think, across the board. Henry VIII was the worst. But with Matterhorn, you see the same exact mindset with Mac and his best friend Ilya Ivashka, who's, despite the name is American, is someone. These guys were tight. They were climbing buddies. No way would this guy ever betray him. So he was almost purposefully blind, right?
yeah.
That does it. So that's the human condition you're talking about, Tony. Is people sometimes they just don't want to see it, even though it's right in front of their eyes.
Isn't that amazing though? I mean, I saw that. I mean, in the book as well. I didn't want to give away too much. I mean, I never know how far to go because I want people to read it,
Sure.
and it's so worth the read. It's like I said, it is a thrill ride. You won't want to put it down. Um, but there is a story of betrayal and friendship that's happening there. And I agree with you. I think you don't want to see it. You always want to believe the best in the people that you surround yourself with, or maybe you have feelings for, and maybe clouds your judgment. And in his business, it's not like the rest of us. Having your judgment clouded could mean being dead, right? I mean, your judgment's got to be spot on
It
in
does.
that world.
And in that business, though, you have to have somebody you trust, right? Sooner or later, you have to have someone you trust. And so this is what makes the betrayal in this book, and we don't have to give any more away, that much more, I don't know if the word is poignant, surprising, you know, when someone really close to you that you had been forced to trust for years is the one that puts the dagger in your back.
And I felt that. And that was one of the things I had to compliment you about. I felt it, right? I
Mm.
felt the emotion associated with it in the story, which is, again, I keep saying not common for thrillers, but there's so much going on in your book. It's a thrill. It's a thrill. You know, you go through, there's a lot of action. For people who like action, you will not be disappointed. But you felt the emotion too. There's so many things happening here simultaneously that, again, you just won't know what to look at first. I really liked that.
Well, gosh, now you're scaring me because I'm writing the second book and I got to keep up to these high levels.
Well, it seems to come natural. You know, it's a good story. I like to think that sometimes you know these characters, they become second nature to you. I assume the writer, and but definitely to the reader.
Mm.
You know, that they become second nature. They become like other people you know. You feel like you could hang out with. So I think just walking Mac through his life, it seems like it would come natural. Like if you were hanging out with him, it would just, you know. I almost felt like I could have palled around with Mac and knew what he was going to do next. Like, because he just, you know, you got to trust his traits.
I think Mac is best viewed. He's like the older brother we all would like to have. He's
Yeah.
smarter, wiser, more competent. It's like when you're in a pinch, you want to go see Mac Decker. You know he's kind of going to figure out the solution and save your butt. It's funny when you write these books, the protagonist is always the hardest character to write because they have to be near
Flawed
perfect,
but
but
likable.
flawed. Yeah, flawed. And the bad guy is the most fun person to write because you can do whatever you want with him, right? I mean, my bad guy, he's a drunk, he's a womanizer, he's great. They're so much fun to write. And you can do all the stuff that's where you have fun writing, and you have to be much more disciplined with the creating a multi-layer, believable protagonist.
Oh, and you definitely captured that. So I loved the book. I'm going to put a link up to anybody, you know, who wants to buy the book. It's a great book. I highly recommend this read. Um, Again, you don't if you don't like thrillers, you'll like this one because there's a lot going on.
Thank you.
And if you love thrillers, you won't be disappointed. It was very hard to put the book down, very hard. It just you want to get to the end, you want to know what happened. You know, I got the sense that I was taking the journey with him. Your imagery, I think, is very vivid. I felt like I was in Switzerland. I felt like I was part of the team. Another thing I loved about it, right? I felt like I was kind of going along with him, you know, part of doing this, and that's really hard to capture. I think the best books draw you in, that you feel like you're right there in that world, and this did that. So my compliments.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I'm really excited that there's a sequel coming out. I hope when it comes out, you'll come back and talk to me again about the
I'll be
sequel.
back. There will be plenty of sequels in the future, and I have one set up in the past, set in World War II with his grandfather. So it's really a family of spies, the legacy of spies.
Ooh.
Very fun.
Oh, now you got me really excited. So you're going to take me back a little bit to World War II eventually. I don't know in the next book, but eventually as well. I'm excited. This is a great character you've created. I can see this in a film as well as a book. I mean, I'm assuming how the day that this book truly releases, I think it's coming out now or next month, correct?
April 1st is the release date. Yes.
Yeah, April 1st. I can see Hollywood knocking. This belongs on the screen. It just so visually beautiful, so you know, so emotionally beautiful. I really I could see this happening.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go back to this moment and say,
Right. Ah,
I knew
well,
it
thank
would
you.
wind up there.
Excellent. I'm really happy.
Thank you so much for joining me. I mean, this
It was a
just flew
pleasure.
by.
Pleasure talking to you, Toni, and I'll see you next year.
Yeah, you got it. I'll see you next year.
Bye.
Bye.